Listen to something, anything. A song on your phone, the radio through the wall, the music playing in the shop you just walked into. Whatever it is, whatever genre, whatever era, whatever language, it is almost certainly tuned to a frequency that didn't exist as a universal standard until 1955. A frequency that was not chosen by musicians, not chosen by composers, not chosen by any study of the human body or the natural world. A frequency that was chosen by committee, adopted by bureaucracy, and imposed on every instrument, every recording, every orchestra, and every pair of headphones on Earth within a single generation. That frequency is 440 Hz, the note A above middle C, the reference point from which every other note in modern music is derived, the invisible spine of every melody you've ever heard. And before it existed, there was another frequency, one that had been used for centuries, one that composers fought to protect, one that was quietly removed from the musical landscape and replaced so completely that most people alive today have never heard it, don't know it existed, and couldn't tell you why it was taken away. The deeper I went into the story of how that happened, the more I realized this wasn't about music theory. It was about what sound does to the body, and why that had to be controlled. Start with what we know, because what we know is already strange enough. Before the 20th century, there was no universal tuning standard. The note A could be anywhere from 400 to 460 Hz, depending on the country, the city, the cathedral, the instrument maker. Orchestras in Milan played at a different pitch than orchestras in London. Church organs in Vienna were tuned differently than chamber instruments in Paris. Music was local. Pitch was flexible. The idea that every instrument on Earth should vibrate at the same frequency would have struck an 18th century musician as bizarre, unnecessary, and vaguely authoritarian. But within this diversity, there was a center of gravity, a frequency that kept appearing across centuries and cultures, not because anyone mandated it, but because musicians, when left to tune by ear, when left to feel for the pitch that sat right in the body, kept landing in the same place, around 432 Hz. Pythagoras, in the 6th century BC, built an instrument called the monochord and used it to explore the mathematical relationships between tones. The tuning he arrived at aligned with what we now call 432. Joseph Sauveur, the French physicist known as the father of musical acoustics, proposed in 1713 a system of scientific pitch based on middle C at 256 Hz, which places A at approximately 430 to 432 depending on the temperament used. Mozart composed at around 430. Bach and Beethoven operated in a similar range. The French government established its diapason normal in 1859 at 435 Hz, close to 432, and a standard that would hold across much of Europe and the United States for nearly a century. And then there was Verdi. Giuseppe Verdi, the greatest Italian opera composer of his era, took the matter further than anyone else. In 1884, he petitioned the Italian government to formally adopt 432 Hz as the national standard. His argument was not mystical, it was physical. He had watched the pitch of orchestras creep upward decade after decade as instrument makers built brighter, louder instruments and orchestras competed for a more brilliant sound. And he had watched what that rising pitch did to the human voice. Singers were being forced to produce notes at frequencies higher than the composers had intended. The strain was damaging voices. The music was being distorted. The body was being asked to do something it wasn't designed to do. Verdi's proposal passed into Italian law. 432 Hz became the legal standard in Italy. The French maintained their standard nearby. The New York Metropolitan Opera tuned in the same range. For decades, the musical world operated within a narrow band centered around a frequency that composers, musicians, and physicists had converged on independently across 3 centuries. This raises a simple but critical question. What happened? In 1939, an international conference was held in London to address the question of a universal tuning standard. The conference recommended 440 Hz, not 432, not 435, a frequency 8 Hz higher than what Verdi had fought for, what the French had established, what the Metropolitan Opera used, what centuries of musical practice had gravitated toward. The recommendation was made. The conversation moved on. Then something happened that ensured the recommendation would never be revisited. World War II. For 6 years, the world had other concerns, and when the dust settled, the 440 standard was waiting. In 1955, the International Organization for Standardization adopted it as ISO 16. It became the global reference pitch. Every piano tuner, every guitar manufacturer, every recording studio, every orchestra, every digital instrument, every piece of software that generates sound adopted 440. Within a generation, every piece of music produced anywhere on Earth was built on a foundation that had existed for less than 20 years. The official explanation collapses here, because the reasons given for choosing 440 were not scientific, they were not biological. They were not based on any study of what frequency best suited the human voice or the human ear or the human nervous system. The BBC had pushed for 440 because 439, the frequency they'd been using, was a prime number and therefore difficult to generate electronically with standard equipment. Orchestras in some countries had already drifted upward to 440 or beyond. The choice was described as a practical compromise, a convenient middle ground that simplified electronic calibration and standardized international performance. A convenience. The frequency that governs every piece of music on Earth was chosen for electronic convenience. The silence was deafening. Now let's talk about what was lost. Because something was lost, and it wasn't just a number. It was a relationship between sound and matter that you can see with your own eyes if you know where to look. In the late 18th century, a German physicist named Ernst Chladni sprinkled fine sand on a metal plate and drew a violin bow along its edge. As the plate vibrated, the sand arranged itself into geometric patterns, intricate, symmetrical, beautiful. Different frequencies produced different patterns. Each pattern was determined entirely by the frequency of the sound. Change the frequency and the pattern changes. This was the birth of what we now call cymatics, the science of making sound visible. Go look at cymatic images yourself. They are widely available. What you will see is this. When frequencies that align with natural harmonic ratios are played through a medium, the patterns that form are coherent, organized, symmetrical. They look like something, like the geometry you find in snowflakes, in flower petals, in the spiral of a nautilus shell. When frequencies that do not align with those ratios are played, the patterns break down. They become chaotic, asymmetrical, disordered. Now play 432 Hz through a cymatic plate. Watch what happens to the sand. Watch what happens to water. The patterns are clean, coherent, geometric. Play 440 Hz. The patterns shift. They are still patterns, but the geometry is different. Less symmetrical, less ordered. The difference is subtle but visible, and it has been documented by every cymatics researcher who has tested the two frequencies. This raises a simple but critical question. If sound creates physical patterns in matter and the human body is 60% water, what patterns is the music we listen to creating inside us? I'm not making a mystical claim. I'm asking a physical question. Sound is vibration. Vibration moves through matter. The human body is matter. Every cell, every membrane, every fluid-filled cavity in your body responds to the vibrations that pass through it. This isn't alternative medicine. This is physics. The question isn't whether sound affects the body. The question is how, and whether the frequency at which all modern music vibrates was chosen with any consideration of that effect. The answer, as far as I can determine, is no. No study was conducted before the 1939 conference to determine whether 440 Hz was optimal for the human body. No biological argument was made. No medical evidence was presented. The frequency was chosen for calibration convenience and institutional compromise. The most intimate sonic environment in human experience, the music that enters your ears and vibrates through your tissues and accompanies you from birth to death, was standardized on the basis of engineering practicality. The evidence suggests something much larger than a tuning preference. Because here's the timeline that nobody lays out in sequence. For centuries, musicians tuned to frequencies in the low 400s and 30s. Composers who understood the human voice, who wrote music designed to resonate with the body, who spent their lives inside the physics of sound, consistently chose this range. Verdi fought a political battle to protect it. The French government enshrined it. The Metropolitan Opera used it. And then, in a single conference in 1939, the standard was pushed 8 Hz higher. Not by musicians, not by composers, not by anyone who had studied what sound does to the body. By a standards committee balancing the interests of broadcasters, instrument manufacturers, and electronics engineers. As if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand. Now, consider what 8 Hz means. It sounds trivial. It sounds like a rounding error, a difference so small it shouldn't matter. But 8 Hz at the reference pitch cascades through the entire musical scale. Every note is shifted, every chord, every harmonic relationship, the entire architecture of music moves, and the body that receives that music, the nervous system that processes it, the water in the cells that responds to it, all of it is now vibrating at a frequency that is 8 Hz removed from where centuries of musical instinct had placed it. Here's where the thread connects to something most people don't know. The Schumann resonance, the fundamental electromagnetic frequency of the Earth's atmosphere, vibrates at approximately 7.83 Hz. This is the base frequency of the planet itself, the electromagnetic hum of the cavity between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. When you divide 432 by powers of 2, dropping octave by octave, you arrive at 6.75 Hz, close to the Schumann fundamental. When you do the same with 440, the number doesn't align. The mathematics of 432 nest into natural resonant systems. The mathematics of 440 do not. This doesn't prove anything. But it raises a question that nobody answered before making the change. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across every domain I've examined. Systems that synchronized human beings with natural frequencies, with the body, with the planet, with the mathematical relationships that govern physical resonance, replaced by systems that synchronized human beings with institutions. The calendar replaced the moon. The clock replaced the sun. Consolidated sleep replaced the natural rhythm of first and second sleep. And 440 replaced the frequency that the human ear, the human voice, and the human body had gravitated toward for as long as instruments have existed. The deeper I went, the more I found that the 432 question isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a design question that was never asked. It's a biological inquiry that was never conducted. It's the absence of a conversation that should have happened before the most pervasive sonic environment in human civilization was permanently altered. The people who made the decision didn't study the body. They studied the broadcast equipment. They didn't ask what frequency heals. They asked what frequency calibrates. I don't have a complete theory. I have a question that gets louder the deeper I look. Why was a frequency that had been used for centuries, championed by the greatest composers in history, enshrined in law by at least one national government, and aligned with natural harmonic systems, replaced by a frequency chosen for electronic convenience? Why was no biological study conducted? Why was no consideration given to what centuries of musical instinct had already determined? Why did no one ask what the change would do to the bodies that would spend their lives immersed in the new frequency? And the question underneath all the others, the one that sits in the silence between the notes, what was 432 Hertz doing to us that 440 Hertz doesn't? I'll leave you with this. Tonight or tomorrow or sometime soon, find a piece of music you know well, something you've heard 100 times. Now find a version tuned to 432 Hertz. They exist. Independent musicians release them. Conversion tools are freely available. Play the two versions back to back. Listen with your whole body, not your ears, your chest, your stomach, the base of your spine, the back of your skull. You may not hear a difference, but you might feel one. A settling, a softening. Something in your nervous system that unclenches by a fraction you didn't know was clenched. Something that sounds, for a moment, like the music is tuning itself to you rather than asking you to tune yourself to it. That feeling has a frequency. It's the one they changed. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.